All right, fast-moving Monday show, Overreaction Monday style, back on this beautiful September morning. All right, we do it each and every Monday at 9:35, roughly or thereabout. We talk with our guy Sam Herder from Hero Sports BetMGM to recap the weekend that was at FCS football. Yes, a weekend still happened. I know the Bison and the Jackrabbits didn't play, but there were games that went down. We were just visiting off air on a couple teams that were surprising. I would say overall there were a couple of really good games. What did we learn, I guess, with the Bison and the Jacks not playing out of this weekend in your mind?
Yeah, I think we saw, it was interesting that Montana State, they had a similar performance as South Dakota State did last
Yep.
week, where they won by 2-3 scores, but it was kind of just kind of a ho-hum performance. And Montana State was up 17-0 at halftime against Mercyhurst, and you thought, okay, this is going to be a 42-0 ball game. But then they just didn't score the rest of the way, and
Yeah.
their defense held strong. And so it was like a 17-0 win for Montana State, but you kind of left there going, I don't know, that wasn't that great of a performance. And meanwhile, Montana dominated Indiana State and looked really, really good and confident. Tarleton State keeps on rolling. They lost their starting quarterback Victor Caballas, which could be a major, major injury because I think he's top 10, top 5
Yeah.
quarterback in the FCS. He had a boot on his foot, so we'll see what the status is for him. But Daniel Greek stepped in and played really well, and they continue to dominate inferior FCS opponents. This is their third straight game of 50 plus points for Tarleton State. And then you had Monmouth looked really good in a ranked opponent. I thought Abilene Christian looked really good as well
Yep,
against a
he lost
ranked
to Pete.
opponent. So we're getting, resumes filled out a little bit more with some ranked matchups, and overall things are starting to, I don't know if we don't know a whole lot, as far as how things are going to shake out, but certainly as more games are being played, we're going to learn some more.
Sam, I have an email I want to read to you that I got before the show started today. Dom, the inherent historical allegiance to the Missouri Valley Football Conference and Big Sky is so obvious in the current FCS polling. Based on 2025 so far, there is absolutely no reason Tarleton State should not be at worst number 2 in the country. They have a case to be number 1, given NDSU's ridiculous schedule has been that of a JV team. By the way, I'm a longtime Missouri Valley Football Conference supporter. What do you make of that?
I mean, you could kind of go in circular arguments all day about that. Does Tarleton State, if we're just looking at this year and this year only, have an argument that they're a top 2 team in the country? Yeah, but at the same time, you can also, maybe it is historical bias, but you can look at past years as kind of a starting point of how you view some teams. And just because you beat an FBS opponent doesn't mean you're one of the best teams in the country. In fact, last year, half of the teams, actually four of the 6 teams that beat FBS opponents last year didn't even make it past the second round. 3 of them didn't even make the playoffs. Beating up on Mississippi Valley State and Chattanooga and Central Arkansas, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a top team, in the country. And yeah, maybe there's a little bit of bias of we just assume NDSU is better than Tarleton State, just like we assumed the Dakota and Montana Powers were better than UIW in 2022 or Furman in 2023. Like, yeah, maybe there is some bias in that assumption, but 95% of the time, that assumption and that quote unquote bias ends up being correct,
Yes.
in the FCS playoffs. And so I get the argument of you just need to look at this year and not previous years, and not look at how things shake out historically. At the same time, there's that argument of, well, we've seen this story before, of a team that looks really good in the regular season, and then they can't just physically match up. So I do think Tarleton is really good.
I do too.
I think
Yep.
I'm not totally sure about their offensive line. I think they're pretty good on the offensive line, but I don't think they're necessarily dominant. But they got great receivers, great quarterback play, great depth at running back. I do think defensively they look better than they were last year. I think they look tougher, more stout, more depth. Especially in the front 7 compared to last year, which is what they need. But I want to see them how they do throughout UAC play. If they go undefeated throughout UAC play, then I think top 3.
I'm
for
with
sure.
you. Yep.
But just being a little bit more patient right now on Tarleton.
And I would say just one last point on that before we move on. They won a game in the playoffs. Be a top 8, make the final 8. Heck, if you win that, then I'm ready to consider it. I know they're good. You wrote about it yesterday. Beating Army gets my attention because Army won 10 games last year. That's a good win. But beating up on who they've beating up, I'm not gonna go crazy yet. Because look, Illinois State won on Saturday, Sam, but got pushed to double overtime with North Alabama. That's not great. I'm not ready to, well, okay, just because they won, I'm going to keep them at number 4 in the poll. I didn't do that. I don't believe you did that.
Yeah, and it's difficult too to really know for sure how teams match up. Because we've seen teams that look really, really good in the regular
Yeah.
season, and then they flame out in the playoffs just because it is a different level. It is a different level when we're talking about different conferences. And again, maybe that is a little bit of bias, but again, we've seen that play out year over year, and it's just tough to know how teams
Yep.
match up for sure. And even I've heard coaches say that, like every now and then, in the playoffs, like coaches, you'll talk to them and be like, from what we've seen on film, like we feel really good about this game. There's other matchups in the playoffs where like we just don't know. Like this team looks terrific against SoCon opponents or Southland opponents, but like we don't know exactly how we're going to match up. And it ends up, afterwards you talk to them and they're like, yeah, they just weren't very good, or they were better than we had thought. Like we didn't know for sure matched up because there's no crossover opponents, and so we just don't know for sure until like we see the playoffs hit. But I think for now, Tarleton certainly deserves a certain level of
Yeah.
respect, and it's not like there's some ho hum program either. Like they had 23,000 at their
Yeah.
game, and they have great facilities, they have great NIL, and I'm sure they're revenue sharing, and so this isn't some like random, small school, out there coming up through the ranks. I do think they deserve certain levels of respect, but they call it bias, but you can probably say, well, I think NDSU is better than Tarleton, right now based off of what we saw and just based off of maybe some past precedent.
My guy, Lewis Walker, former Bison assistant, is the DC at Monmouth. He's trying to tell me to give some respect to Monmouth. Do we give it to them after what they did to Villanova on Saturday?
Well, tell them to get that defense going a little bit more. But like Monmouth, they're gonna score points on
Oh,
on
man.
anyone. It's a matter of if their defense can get enough stops, which is what they did. I thought Monmouth, despite giving up, I think it was 33 points, I did think their defense played well overall. And I mean, they don't need to allow less than 20 points in a game. Monmouth could allow 28 points per game defensively and be ranked the 70th defense in the FCS, and they're still going to win a lot of games. And I mean, Monmouth doesn't have a ranked opponent on the rest of their schedule. Neither does Rhodey. So we could have Monmouth and
Yikes.
Rhodey undefeated versus FCS teams with no ranked wins. We'll see if New Hampshire is ranked, when they play them. But yeah, I think Monmouth is going to be a scary team. And they're not just necessarily an aerial attack as well, because they do have a pretty decent offensive line. They can run the ball. Derek Robertson is, I mean, he's probably one game away from already reaching 2,000 yards. He's already at 18 touchdown passes, so he's really good.
Yeah.
I will say that. Like he probably is a front runner for the Walter
I was
Payton
going to ask
Award.
you that. Yeah.
But if Cole Payton has a season like Cam Miller did last year, or Chase Mason has a season like Tommy Mellott did last year, I don't think it's necessarily a given that Robertson wins it, because this award is voted on after the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, Robertson had 1,500 more passing yards than Cam Miller, even more than that than Mellott, and Robertson didn't even make the top 3 in voting. And so just because he's going to throw for 4,000 yards, he'll probably, I mean, he's going to be, a front runner. But if another quarterback, out there has a Mellott like season
Yeah.
or a Miller like season, I don't think it's a given that Robertson wins it just yet.
Monmouth is moved up in my poll. I believe they did in yours as well. Are they the best team in that league in the CAA in your mind, or is it Rhode Island?
I mean, I wish they played each other,
Yeah,
so
right?
we could figure that out on the field. But with the unbalanced scheduling, that's not going to happen. And they don't play, many more ranked opponents.
No.
Like I said, if any, I think they both have New Hampshire on their schedule, but UNH is probably going to drop out after they lost to Dartmouth.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think Rhodey is a more complete team overall. AJ Pena for Rhodey is a really good, maybe perhaps the best defensive player in the FCS. And then Monmouth maybe has the best offensive player in the FCS, and Derek Robertson. I think they're both good. I think they could, one or two, both be a quarterfinal team. I'm not sure how they would stack up if they had to go to a Montana or a Dakota team. But again, maybe that's just bias of us assuming that Montana is just better than Rhodey just because it's, Montana. Maybe that is assumption, but maybe it's a safe assumption.
But we've seen it. Yeah, we've seen that act before. Until they beat them, I'm not going to go there. I think you're in the same boat. This is what Monmouth has left, by the way. Delaware State, Towson, Stony Brook, Hampton, Bryant, UNH, North Carolina A&T, Albany. They're going to be 11-1, man. Nobody's going to beat them, right? I don't see that.
Yeah, and I mean Youngstown just beat Towson.
Yeah.
Stony Brook, I thought was maybe a playoff worthy team. They've kind of fallen
Yep.
off. Again, New Hampshire, maybe they'll bubble back up. But I mean, Monmouth did play Villanova, who was ranked number 11 at the time. We'll see how Nova
I don't
finishes
think they're
out.
any
But
good either, though.
yeah, and we saw it with Rhodey last year, who hit, I think it was 10 wins, and they still didn't get a top 8 seed
No, they played. Yeah,
because
they
Rhodey
played
did.
Thanksgiving weekend. You're right.
Yep,
Yep.
because I don't think they had any ranked wins on their resume. If they did, they had one against a team that dropped out of the ranking. So it's a
Yeah.
we say it all the time. It's a blessing and a curse for the CAA when you have that many teams in there.
Correct,
You can have a
Amundo.
really good record, but you can be punished because you don't play a whole lot of ranked teams.
Let's talk some Valley. Southern Illinois is on my radar, and I know SEMO's not good. I think we saw that in Fargo. Proven again. Southern Illinois scored 31 first half points, but DJ Williams, their transfer quarterback from Murray State, who actually we saw in Fargo a couple years ago, he got hurt early in last year, totally derailed SIU's season. Is it time to start paying closer attention to Southern Illinois now, Sam?
Yeah, I think they are kind of in that second tier in the FCS of a team that is going to be, dangerous. And I think NDSU goes to SIU. I'm not sure who else they get, but it's an opponent where definitely can give some top teams scares. And DJ Williams has been, awesome this year, close to 1,000 yards passing, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also has a team high 316 rushing yards and 7 scores, and he's kind of picked up where he left off last year. That was an unfortunate injury for him because he was lights out last year too, and I think his best game was against UIW. That certainly raised a lot of attention for Williams, and he ended up missing the rest of last year due to that injury. But he was a big reason why a lot of people were high on SIU. The Salukis were just snake bit by injuries
Yes.
last year. Even like Colin Bohannock, their star linebacker, he's back this year. He's playing well, but he missed most of last season as well. But Williams has been very, very good. Dual threat abilities have been awesome. And, SIU was, I mean, 2 years ago, they were close to making it to the quarterfinals. And I think they can be that type of team once again, just from what I've seen so
Yeah,
far.
that's right. They lost that game to Idaho in a tight game there. They come to Fargo in a couple weeks, actually, for
Okay.
for this is what they have after their bye, because everybody in the Valley except the Bison and the Jacks are off this week. Indiana State at the Bison, home for UND. Suddenly that game looks awfully, awfully interesting in the middle of October. They go to Murray, they go to Youngstown. They don't play the Jacks this year, so that's a major advantage for SIU, and they host USD in the next to last game of the season at Illinois State. I look at the end of the year for them, that could be for a seed maybe, depending if they play as well as they have.
Yeah, and that's a pretty favorable schedule. I mean, we'll see it where USD is at, but that's probably a favorable one there. And if you can split the games against the North Dakota
Yep.
teams, probably lose in Fargo and perhaps beat UND at home, like you're sitting pretty good there for a playoff seed.
All right, South Dakota's up next, and they beat Drake on Saturday. They did what they were supposed to do. How do you feel any differently about the Coyotes that you do today than you did, say, 2 weeks ago?
A little bit, but still, kind of a little wary about their performance against Lamar and certainly their performance against Northern Colorado. And you could really kind of twist your brain into a pretzel because you could say,
Yep.
well, South Dakota beat Drake more handedly than South Dakota
And the
State
Jacks
did.
did.
But
Yep.
you could also say that, well, maybe Drake was a little more beat up, or South Dakota, I would assume, was playing with much more urgency in this game than South Dakota State was. The Oats or the Jacks were probably emotional letdown, looking forward to the bye week, let Drake hang around a little bit more. Meanwhile, the Yotes were saying, okay, we gotta win this game and win handily, or else we're gonna run the risk of falling out of the ranking. So it's tough to compare in that sense. But you did see, I think the one thing you wanted to see with South Dakota in this game, especially offensively, was just to see things start to click. Whether it was timing or a little bit continuity on the offensive line, or Bauman being a little bit more on the same page with his receivers, and that's I think exactly what you saw. So it's certainly potentially a launching point for South Dakota. Obviously, the true gauge will be this week when they go to NDSU, and the Bison have had a couple of weeks to prepare for.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll say it in press conference or interviews, but I'm sure there's a certain level of revenge factor on the mind of NDSU. So perhaps USD will go into the Hornets' nest a little bit this weekend, but maybe they execute well, put on a good game plan, and I don't really expect USD to win, honestly. But if they can keep it competitive, that's okay. Maybe they're back rising up and playing a lot better than they were.
Before we go, let's do your spotlight games. That game is one of them. Obviously, the USD NDSU game, a fun one late Saturday night in the Big Sky. Idaho, Montana, going to get some national television, and that's a prove-it game, I think, for both teams. Idaho could be 4-0. I know they're not, but they could be 4-0 with 2 FBS wins.
Yeah, the Vandals, they lost by 1 score against Washington State, also lost by 1 score this last weekend to San Jose State. So, both Washington State and San Jose State, maybe not the best FBS teams, but still not only almost beat them, but have leads in the fourth quarter. I certainly feel like Idaho thinks, that they could be 4-0 at this point. And then Montana, this is an interesting game for them because they played a D2 opponent in their first game, kind of choppy in the first half before pulling away. And then Montana, of course, beats UND. The Grizz didn't look great for 75% of that game and then come back and win.
Nope.
And then they dominate Indiana State this last week and look really, really good. But Indiana State's not very good and down to their backup quarterback. And at the same time, Montana State was somewhat struggling against Mercyhurst, and so I know a lot of Grizz fans want them to be ranked ahead of Montana State, and maybe there's an argument, for that. I think if the Grizz beat Idaho this weekend, that's now 2 ranked wins, and I think maybe you can then push the Grizz up. So that is a really good gauge for both of those teams. We talked about South Dakota and NDSU. That's another good one, another ranked matchup. Abilene Christian goes to UIW.
I like that one. I like that game.
UIW is not going to be ranked anymore, but we'll see. They're 1-3 now, just lost to ranked Northern Arizona. Abilene Christian looks really, really good. I know the final score was decent against Austin Peay, but Abilene Christian really dominated that game. And then the last one, I'll throw in an FCS versus FBS. Rhodey goes to Western Michigan. If Rhodey wants to be a top 8 seed, they might need this one.
Beat them. Yep.
They might not have another resume boosting win. Western Michigan is not very good. I think they're 1-2 right now, something like that. So this is a key game for Rhodey to have a win on their resume that kind of jumps off the page.
Any wins over Maction should be automatic. You get seated for that. Looking forward to another great weekend, especially a couple of those games you mentioned on Saturday. Thanks for the time as always, Bud. Be well. We'll talk to you next week, okay?
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
There you go. Sam Herder joins us each and every Monday to give us the lowdown on FCS football. Get you ready for the Bison and the Coyotes. We'll have coverage of that all week long here on The Big Show. We'll break. We come back. We'll wrap up our first hour. Jeff Kolpak coming up in hour 2. And our high school football recap. Some dynamite games and performances over the weekend. Back on Overreaction Monday after this.